Hey everybody, KC here. So one of the things that I'm doing this summer, since I'm not in Portland team teaching the retail and CPG marketing class with Tom Gilpatrick, is I'm contributing a series of interviews to that class in which I'm talking with industry leaders about leadership, about innovation, and talk about the industry. These are the kinds of things that very often a lot of these executives will come to Portland and do in front of the class, but things being what they are, we're doing them by Zoom, and the students are watching them online. Uh, One of the ones I did recently was with Scott Moses, who's the managing director and head of grocery and pharmacy and restaurants for PJ Solomon. And Scott's one of the smartest people I know about the industry. And so we did this interview in which we talked a lot about the distance between the haves and the have less and the have-nots, right? Which is really expanding. The economics of the industry are becoming very, very difficult for a lot of players, and they're looking for ways in which they can compete. And this is exacerbated by the fact that Amazon has so much access to capital and is worth so much more money than almost everybody else combined, which gives Amazon an enormous advantage going forward. And if you look at other studies that talk a lot about the fact that how people are now going to non-traditional stores to shop, how Amazon is expected to double its e-grocery sales just in the next few years, it begins to look like Amazon has an advantage that's going to be very difficult to beat back. And the smaller you are and the more independent you are, it may make it even more difficult than that. Scott believes, and I totally subscribe to this, that we're living in an era where it's basically a tale of two industries. You have some companies that are operating at this level, and you have other companies that are operating at a completely different level simply because of the economics. And so we did this interview. We talked a lot about this for the students. And when we were done, basically we sort of looked at each other and said, this might be a really good piece for Morning Newsbeat. So that's what we're going to do today. It's a special sort of one topic Morning Newsbeat this morning. It's just Scott Moses and me talking about the industry, talking about the bifurcation of so many different companies, and talking about what, especially on the small side, what companies have to do to survive. Listen, I don't want to live in a world, certainly, and I know this is exactly how Scott feels, that is so dominated by Amazon that there's simply no room for other companies to survive. That doesn't sound like a very interesting place to live as far as I'm concerned, and it doesn't even sound like a really good place to shop. So here's my interview with Scott Moses. It's I think, a really good conversation, originally done for Portland State University, and now here it is for you. Enjoy, everybody. Well, Scott Moses, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it, and I know our students at Portland State appreciate it. Let's start by just talk us through what you do. I've sort of explained it in very broad terms, but for the students, explain exactly what you do for a living.
Sure. So I advise grocers and some restaurants and pharmacy owners, but mostly grocers, on mergers and acquisitions. So that's everything from sales of entire companies or divestitures of parts to acquisitions to mergers. In some cases, just giving folks, general advice on corporate finance and how they ought to handle their capital structures, and in some cases, restructurings in difficult times.
And so you could represent in a deal between two grocers, you could represent the buyer or the seller.
Correct.
Depending on who brings you in. Correct.
And look, most of the time we work for the selling company. But look, I've helped Kroger buy Roundy's, and we're advising Price Chopper on its merger with Tops as an example. So we do some sort of buy side related work, but most of what we do is on the selling side.
It's always and correct me if this is a misapprehension on my part or misunderstanding of the reality of it on my part, but I've always had a sense, it's my own bias, that deals make more sense when they happen between two retailers as opposed to, say, a retailer and an investment group, an investment bank or something like that. because two retailers, when they combine, will have a different set of priorities, largely growth focused, um, than they will if a retailer is bought by an investment group where they're looking for some fees, they're looking for a period of time, they want to get as efficient as possible, and they see an exit strategy. Is that a fair assessment on my part?
It is, and I'd say a couple of things. At its most simple level, if you owned a peanut butter company and I owned a jelly company, it would make a whole lot of sense for us to try to work together, right? Mm-hmm. And save money on all sorts of inputs and make a more efficient combined business than for either one of us to sell our company to a standalone investor who doesn't provide any of what the other of us would. So that's everything from procurement savings on cost. And in grocery, it's your cost of goods. If you're buying more stuff, you ought to be able to buy it cheaper. If you have a bigger distribution need, then you ought to be able to do that more efficiently. You ought to be able to run your stores more efficiently and pay less for like a labor scheduling program. You ought to be able to run your corporate infrastructure a lot more efficiently because you only need one CFO. You only need one risk management department. You only need to pay for a long list of what can be really expensive support contracts, and you only need one. And the bigger you are and the bigger your need, the more cost effective and it ought to be for you to get that contract. So for those and a whole host of other reasons, there are all these strategic benefits that we call synergies that in some cases are actually greater between the two companies that are combining than either company's standalone profit, which is a pretty spectacular thing for the folks involved in those combinations. And we've done a few like that. And most of what we do, I should say, are strategic combinations. They are harder, they take longer because, companies tend to be a little bit competitive with each other. And so there's more wrangling and jousting and such. But once you cut through all that, there tends to be a whole lot more value to be created relative to just a standalone sale to an investor who doesn't add any of that value. It's not to say we don't do it sometimes, because sometimes that is the best answer or the only answer. But most of the time we do strategic combinations to extract as much value for everybody involved to make the best possible combined company as we can.
And I've talked to CEOs over the years who have been in situations where they're in a retail business owned by a financial concern, and they have been frustrated because they want to grow the business and they want to invest and they want to innovate. And the message they're often getting from the people that own them is, no, you need to cut costs. So a retailer might say things like, but I got to invest in people because we have a customer service driven business. If I don't have enough people, I can't provide the proper level of customer service. And they're saying, no, you got to drive down your labor factor, not let it creep up. And that can be really frustrating for somebody who wants to grow a business.
Well, that's right. And look, while this is not the case of all financial investors, in some cases they are very short-term oriented. In most cases, I would tell you, I don't think they are. I think that they are trying to create value for the long term, because if they don't do that, frankly, it's going to be hard for them to sell the business and ultimately exit their investment. So if a buyer had the sense that they were only investing for a year or two and not investing for the longer term, they're not going to pay as much. Now, with strategic combinations, most of the investors are not, and the owners are not thinking about a year or two or five, they're thinking generationally.
Right.
And so we're thinking always about how to create long-term benefit that helps the teams, that helps those communities where they operate. And of course, in so doing, it helps the owners of those companies too. But there are different constituents that those strategic combinations and parties tend to think about. And so the priorities are certainly different, Kevin.
Last question, and then we'll move on, just about how this all works. So it was a great example. I have a peanut butter company, you have a jelly company, okay. And then if we can find a bread company, wow, we're in great shape. How often, in terms of your business, how often do one or more of the players come to you to say, I think this makes sense, can you help us make it happen? As opposed to you saying, hey, listen, you've got a jelly company and you're doing okay. You got a peanut butter company that's doing okay. I'm representing a bread company. We can make something happen here. So you initiate the deal as opposed to at least the concept being brought to you.
The vast majority of times people come to us
Okay.
and say, there's a business that we ought to merge with. Can you help us? Our owners, for whatever reason, think it's time to sell this asset or the entire company. Will you help us?
Right.
Now, as a practical matter, part of my job is having, relationships of trust, real friendships with people all around the country. And the benefit of having been doing this for over 20 years is I've worked on transactions with most of the people around the country who are in positions of authority at the different grocers, who are making these sort of strategic calls and thinking about their calculus all the time. And so there's an ongoing regular dialogue. And the best thing is, and this gets better over time because we've done so much together, that trust factor, which is so important in any transaction, to do it right, it's got to be based on trust. These folks know me.
Yeah.
We've worked, in many cases, I've worked for them. In almost all cases, I've worked opposite them. And they know that when I say something, I mean it. When I say it's X, it's X. It's not X plus Y. It's not X minus Y. My word is solid. And that really matters in my line of work because candidly, not everybody who does what I do holds themselves to the same standard.
Yeah.
And so that may be, frankly, why people come to us more than I have to go to someone and say, hey, can we help you with some idea, rather than it's their idea and they solicit our help.
And I will vouch for that to the class who's watching this, that you bring a level of integrity and sort of a broader understanding and interest in making 1 + 1 = 3 than a lot of people in your business. Not everybody, but I think, but I'll vouch for that so they don't think you're just blowing smoke. So
I appreciate that.
One of the things that was interesting, you did a piece recently that we posted on Morning Newsbeat. And in terms of the state of the industry, it was really interesting because one of the things that you laid out was the fact that if you look at all the different formats in retailing right now, literally the only format where the number of stores has gotten smaller in the last decade or so is the conventional store format. Furthermore, it's you used research and found that six of the top 10 retailers in this country would be considered non-traditional. That 61% of consumers see non-traditional grocers as being their primary shopping experience, that was up from just 19% 2 decades ago. That's an enormous change, which puts these so-called traditional grocers, conventional grocers, in a real box. In the sense that they're, and for the purposes of the class, a traditional grocer is basically got the basics, right? It's got meat, seafood. It's got basic fresh foods, perishables, and a basic layout in the core of the store, and nothing that really differentiates them. I always say that IGA stores are by and large, not always, but IGA stores in the United States are a perfect example of what a conventional store is. And then you add to that the fact that, so you've got them diminishing in market power. And at the same time, you've got Amazon, which is enormous, as being, in terms of they are worth more than virtually everybody else combined, which gives them an advantage in terms of cost of capital, their access to money, and
by a lot.
And
by
so
a lot.
Talk a little bit about the kind of hole that really bleak picture paints for both independent and sort of regional grocers. And when we talk about regional grocers in the terms of Portland or independents, we're talking about companies like New Seasons. We're talking about companies like Zupan's. That's or Metropolitan Market in Washington. Those are the kinds of companies we're really talking about.
Yeah. So look, for me, there are two really important parts of my job. Okay, one is keeping secrets and honoring people's trust,
Right.
and the other one is doing math for them, right? At the core of what we do, it's mathematics combined with strategy and economics. And the challenge, I think, in our sector, and I think like most, is that most of the folks who are doing this work, they don't have the time to sit down and do the math on everything that's happening around them that ought to be guiding a bunch of their strategic decisions. And that's not a criticism, that's just a reality. They're really busy. There are lots of things going on. In some cases, the teams are very thin. So having had a bunch of these conversations and gotten a sense that, people don't really appreciate the extent to which non-traditional grocers have gained grocery market share and power in this sector. It's until you do the math and actually lay it out for people to look at, I don't think people get it. And so I kind of felt, having had way too many conversations with folks where it was plainly evident people just didn't get it, that I said, you know what, I've just had the last of those conversations that I'm not going to react to in a way that I think would be useful. And so I wrote it out and wrote something. It's a defense of traditional grocery insofar as it is intended to enlighten people's perspective and help them then react to it. So,
well, because if you're going to defend yourself, you have to understand where you're vulnerable, right? And
right, exactly.
And I would suspect that in some ways, COVID sort of, if they were deluded beforehand, deluded's a strong word, but I'll say that if they were deluded beforehand about their vulnerabilities, they're maybe even more deluded now, because a lot of grocers who were not particularly strong had a really good year and a half. Because all you had to do was if you could bring product in the back door, you could send it out the front door. So everybody had a great, in this sector anyway, almost everybody had a great 2020. And maybe laboring under the misapprehension that this is going to continue even if they don't do anything. Fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that the sector has proven to be yet again reliable in a crisis, and yet again a pillar of, I always say, thousands of American communities. The problem with that is folks can drink their own Kool-Aid a little too much, and the world will revert to a mean over time. That's just statistics. That's what happens. That's math. And I do think it's important for people to understand a problem in order to react to it, and pull that wool away from their eyes. Now, you mentioned Amazon. Okay, Amazon's now the sixth largest grocer in the United States. You're right, they're worth way more than everybody combined. And that ecosystem that they're building, still building, puts them in a position to hook people and charge, I think, way more for groceries than people would ordinarily pay. And because they're getting a convenience trade, that's the deal. I'll pay more because you'll get it to me tomorrow through Prime. And now with the MGM acquisition, I can watch Rocky and show it to my daughter whenever I want. And incidentally, the consequence of their size, right, is A, their ability to squeeze suppliers, but B, they can make those kinds of self-perpetuating investments like MGM, and it costs them nothing. $8.5 billion when you're worth $1.7 trillion is 51 basis points. That's 0.51% of their value. May add value, may not, but you know what? It just got a little bit harder for everybody else to compete against their grocery offering, because now they're offering other stuff that's that much more important.
Well,
big deal.
Yeah. And you said they can charge more, but they also can charge less to hook us in and then charge more down the line.
Totally true. But look, they're making money one way or the other. Their EBITDA, their cash flow last year went up $18 billion. Okay, to give you just a comparison, that is half of Walmart's total EBITDA of 36. And Walmart's up a lot in the last year. They're up like 4 or 5. That 18, that just Amazon's gone up, okay, to 50 something now. That 18 is relative to Costco's 8 and Kroger's 7 total EBITDA. That's how much the pandemic has helped Amazon relative to everybody else. To say that it's extraordinary doesn't cover it. It's like nothing that I personally have ever seen in my career. And I can't think of an example in modern history where a company has catapulted itself and enhanced its market position relative to its smaller peers more than what's happened in the last year. And Walmart's not that far behind them too, because they're making real investments, especially in e-commerce, and Target the same as well.
So when we talk about how to compete with that from an economic perspective,
yep.
Let's first, just to make sure we kind of close off the circle now, Amazon is certainly at least part of the focus of a lot of antitrust interest. You know, from both on the legislative side as well as the regulatory side. I mean, the new head of the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, Lina Khan, I mean, came to prominence writing about basically Amazon as an example of how we need to rethink antitrust issues and enforcement, to the point where they actually suggested, in what is the colossal case of, I think, gall, that Lina Khan really shouldn't be making any rulings on their case because she stated her opinion. Well, get over it, guys. I would disagree with that, but we'll see. Do you think, out of curiosity, that Amazon can be broken up in a way that will diminish its market power? Well, I asked to answer that question because I'll have a follow-up.
Yeah. So first of all, the speaker of a fact doesn't make a fact any less true.
Right.
And I think it's important in today's day and age, and especially for young people, to remember that this whole business of alternative facts and people shading truth, those are just lies, right? And as you're going out in the world and you're thinking about ways you can make a difference, whether personally or with your jobs, okay, the truth is the truth and lies are lies. And we need to make sure we remember that, right? And people who are out there.
Go to my business, but
I'm just saying, right? So in any form, people putting out things that are patently false, they're liars. And there's no other, in my view, there's no other word for it. Now, with respect to what Lina Khan has written and what might happen with Amazon and FTC enforcement, look, they are ubiquitous, they are growing in power, there are risks associated with that. And the question is, and I'm not an FTC lawyer, are they utilizing their ubiquity at the expense of, or to the detriment of, consumers? I don't know the answer to that yet. What I do know is this: in my line of work, for better or worse, the government does not have a sufficient appreciation of the rise of non-traditional grocers, not just Amazon, but Walmart, Target, Dollar General, Aldi, the drug guys, Costco, BJ's, but particularly Amazon, Walmart, and Target online. Okay, that rising strength is extraordinary, and the relevance of their convenience trade in return for higher prices is real. I think that that is an important fact that people need to understand better as they're evaluating candidly the work that I'm doing. Now, I'm biased. I do this for a living. Okay, I want to see the transactions that I help my clients implement get done. But as I say, just because I have a perspective doesn't make a fact any less true. The market power of those folks, in particular, as online grocery is going from 3% to now nearly 10%, likely to 20 some odd percent in the next 5 years. That is a really, really big deal. And I think that, they need to take a hard look at the market power that Amazon has in grocery and obviously across different industries.
And it's interesting, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I'm curious what you think. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. It's interesting because some of the things they write about Amazon, I totally get, but then they talk about things like, well, Amazon will figure out what products are doing really, really well, use that data, create it their own private label, and then where they want to, will give it their own private label, preferential treatment on the site, which sounds horrible, except when you realize that's exactly what every retailer does. And
Costco does that with Kirkland every day.
Absolutely. I mean, Amazon's bigger than everybody else, and therefore, and has better data, and actually acts on its data better than everybody else. But that's what Walmart does. That's what Target does, and that's, by the way, what a good IGA store does. Right? They figure out, what's selling that we can knock off as a private label and sell more of that because we make more money on it. So I do think it's interesting because it seems to me, and I'm not a regulator, I'm not a legislator, and I'm not a lawyer. So I understand this much of it. But I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. Somebody's got to walk in front of these folks and say, wait a minute, you don't understand retail. If you understood retail, you'd know some of what you're suggesting is just how business is done.
Well, that's true. And ultimately, to me, the question is, who is in a better position to work at the detriment of consumers?
Right.
Is it little guys, little grocers around the country, like the folks you mentioned, New Seasons or Metropolitan Market, who, if they were to move their prices, even a small way, are going to get Twittered and pilloried on social media right away? And, my phone's over there. The pricing is transparent. Are they apt to be taking advantage of consumers, right? Do they have the ability to really do that in a sustainable way? Or are the larger guys like Walmart, Target, Amazon, Costco more apt to be doing that? And by the way, include Dollar General and Family Dollar in that mix too, because you know what? Their prices aren't that good. The packs are just smaller.
Right.
And I don't think most people get that. Yet Dollar General's got 17,000 stores and want to double their store base in the next 10 years. And Costco, they do 250 some odd million per store. 56% of that are groceries. That's 130 some odd million per store of groceries. It's like 2.5 million a week, which, Kevin, is like 3 times a great grocery store and like 6 times the average. These guys are serious grocers with serious market power.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. It's in the case of, let's use New Seasons as an example, which has just been involved in a transaction, right?
Yep.
And I mean, the way it seems to me that a retailer like New Seasons competes is by establishing, it's a matter of values and value, right? And I mean, they have strong values in terms of natural and organic, in terms of supporting local farmers, in terms of and being healthier for you than many products in a traditional store, and that they can make the case in a lot of ways that listen, the value that value is not just about price, right? And that's where a lot of retailers get confused, right? Value is one thing, price is another. They're not necessarily the same thing. And it seems to me that coming out of it, and they are connecting to a company that owns other retailers that make that case, so they will be supported in that argument. It seems to me they're about something, right? Isn't the problem when a retailer is vulnerable, it's because they don't really have their story. They haven't told their story effectively. They haven't nailed down their differential advantage and exploited it in a positive way, the way you need to if you're going to compete with, these behemoths like Walmart and Amazon.
Well, that's right. I view it as a spectrum, right? There's commodity on one end and there's differentiation on the other. And in the latter case, that differentiation is driven by experience and trust, right? And we can all use different words for it, but it's basically, do I as a consumer want to be a part of whatever family you're offering? And if you do that well, and I want to be a part of that, I'm going to shop more with you, and I'm going to trust you more, and bring you into my home. And that's the question, right? How much capital capacity do companies have to make the investments that support that? It's people in stores, it's their wages, it's marketing expense, it's social and digital media connection, it's different kinds of better technology and systems. All of those things help to attract and retain customers. And that, again, is where scale is so important, because bigger guys have a very low cost of capital and nearly infinite ability to make those investments. Littler guys don't. So they can't afford the kinds of things the bigger guys can do to do the things, Kevin, that we're saying. And look, there are some large grocers who were spectacular at connecting with customers in their local markets, okay? We sold a business called United Supermarkets to Albertsons, okay? They are spectacular serving West Texas, and they've got some stores in Dallas too. They're wonderful, right? And you know, I'd say the same of Kroger and the work that they've done at a bunch of different banners around the country. But there are also folks who really are more commoditized and need to do more work being differentiated if they're going to continue to attract and retain customers.
Yeah.
Because Amazon and these other guys are working every day to try to grab their customers.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, Amazon knows more about me and acts on that knowledge because I'm an Amazon customer than virtually every other retailer in this marketplace from, and I'm talking mostly independents who I do some shopping with, but they don't act on any of their knowledge. They know very little about, or they know stuff, they don't act on it in a way. And what it seems to me that one of the things that and doesn't always get talked about, but it's the notion of habit is in a lot of ways the smaller retailer's biggest enemy, because once you get locked in and you get used to buying stuff on, oh, I need that, I'll order on Amazon, it'll be here tomorrow. And by the way, now these days, it seems like it's always here tomorrow. It's not 2 days, it's not 3 days, it's tomorrow, in ways that they seem to be violating the laws of physics sometimes. I don't even think about going to the store to get stuff in certain cases. And that habit is such that you don't even necessarily pay attention to the price. It's like one of the great things that's when you put on toll roads, now that they have, they do it by license plate, or they have Easy Pass, or whatever the local example of it is. One of the things they can do, they can raise the tolls, because I don't have to worry about putting a quarter or 50 cents or $1 in anymore. They can rate the toll whatever it want. I'm not going to find out for a month. And it gives them amazing price elasticity, it seems to me, both up and down on the retail level, that the local retailer cannot even begin to approximate.
I completely agree. And let's go back to your regulatory question. The standard is, are companies in a position to exact a small but significant price increase on customers, right? So they have the market power to do that. Well, Amazon's doing that every day, right? Whereas pick your local grocer who you love, right? You and I are big fans of Stu Leonard's. When I'm in Connecticut, that's the only place I'll shop. But I notice the prices.
Right.
And in Portland, it's E-Mart or New Seasons. And I completely agree. Those folks don't have as much of an ability to exact price changes. And that, again, is where I think the government will hang its hat vis-a-vis Amazon, right? Because they are doing that all the time. And by the way, they have all your data, and they can probably even figure out what they can do and what they can get away with, because they know what you've looked at, when you've looked, what you've done, what you haven't bought. They know all that. Whereas your typical regional operator is nowhere near knowing that. And it's a huge information deficit and asymmetry that's a real disadvantage that I'm hopeful over time, as guys get bigger and have more capital and more ability to invest, I'm hoping they can narrow that gap, because that's the path to leverage the experience and trust that local guys have got and continue to be viable in this increasingly difficult sector and competitive dynamic with non-traditional guys.
And it's interesting you bring up Stu Leonard's, and the students should go to stuleonards.com to see how they're different.
No,
this is the very definition of an independent retailer that has staked out a really powerful business model and positioning by stressing value, by not, you used the word commodity before. It seems to me in a lot of ways, any traditional retailer who is focusing on the commodity business is courting disaster. And maybe already be there, right? If they're in the commodity business, if as a retailer they're seen as a commodity retailer, or they're basing their future on the sales of commodities, they're dead. They may be, it's like dead man walking, right? Because they have no differentiation. So do you find, when you're talking to retailers, a growing willingness to say, we need to really rethink our format, that we need to say, hey, listen, we're going to be differentiated in the fresh food business. We're going to find places where we can be different. We can be more local than not, and relegate the sale of those commodities either to a smaller percentage of our bottom line, or maybe we'll just go all online with that stuff because we don't need to have a 45 or 50,000 square foot store that where we're counting on 60 to 65% of the sales selling stuff that we just can't compete with Amazon or Walmart on. Are you seeing, because I think that's where the retail business is going to go as they innovate, or maybe it's wishful thinking. Maybe it's just where I think they need to go if they're going to compete. But do you sense any real movement in that direction from the companies that you talk to?
I think there's a spectrum of reaction to reality.
Right.
Some people think
that is a great line. A spectrum of reaction to reality.
Just made it up on the spot. You inspired me. So look, let's be real. Some people are willing. I just watched Moneyball on TV a few nights ago over the weekend. Okay, right. Some people are willing to do the math and figure out a different way of doing things to survive, and some people aren't. Okay, it's that simple. And I think we all know what's going to happen to the group in the latter camp. Right. What's really special, I think, about our sector is even smaller companies are close enough to their customers that they can continue to be important. They can continue to improve lives. I talked earlier about the importance of supermarkets in the pandemic. Okay, there's still a path to doing that, and my hope, because it's hard to say exactly who's doing what. I know that people are looking at all the different innovations from, as you know, Kroger with Ocado, and you've seen Box with their spectacular automated fulfillment centers driven by AI, also an ESG company, which is really important today, taking care of folks, being more economically sensitive or environmentally sensitive, but also dark stores and different ways of operating, different ways of merchandising their stores to be more tailored, to be less commoditized. Everybody's thinking about those different things. Different companies are more capable of implementing those ideas, more or less capable. And the ultimate question is going to be who's got the courage to make hard decisions and see if they work. Ocado may or may not work in various places, but I give Rodney and the team a lot of credit for giving it a shot. We can debate whether and where it'll be productive and transformative, but what a gutsy move. Now, most people can't afford to go anywhere near making that kind of investment, but I think the signal, the takeaway there is really important. You can evolve, you can make changes. You got to be bold, okay? You've got to be swift, and you got to be willing to fall and fail, as Amazon is, and learn from it and iterate and find a new path, because the absence of that, there is no action. And to me, that is a path to commoditization and ultimately, a sad bankruptcy story, of which there've been too many in our space. Right. So I'm hopeful about people's ability to make these changes. And here, talking with young people, to me, I see a great opportunity in this really special, important sector for young people to help advance the evolution. We need it. Okay, we need people who are energetic, bright, and recognize how the public service that our sector provides. We need people to go ahead and make the investment and help companies evolve. Because look, the America where Amazon, Walmart, Aldi, and some dollar stores as our grocery options, that doesn't work for me. I'm not okay with that at all. Okay, I want the America where we've got a whole bunch of vibrant, differentiated, special regional grocers who are constantly evolving and constantly in a position to continue to serve as pillars among our communities. That's a better version of our country. And it really does go to the extent to which they're willing to make these changes and have the capacity to evolve, the capacity to get bigger, and then have young people like these folks go ahead and make them better able to attract and retain customers, because that's the math. That's where the rubber meets the road in this sector.
It seems in some ways overly simplistic, but I always think it's because if you're selling anything in this country, you're competing with Amazon, inevitably. I mean, it almost doesn't matter what you're selling. So what you got to figure out is, okay, I'm going to do what Amazon either doesn't want to do or can't do. Right now, that's not a huge. I mean, talking about a spectrum. That spectrum is narrowing in some ways all the time. But it seems to me that that is the. It's not the secret sauce, but it is certainly the playing field. I'm really mixing my metaphors here. The playing field on which companies have to operate, and if they don't understand that, don't complain, don't whine, and no amount of mergers or acquisitions can solve that problem. So if you've started to address it, so let me ask you one last question. You've been incredibly generous with your time, but if you were a young person, or you were, or you were the parent to one of the people in the class, and they came to you and said, "Hey, Dad, what should I do?" Or you were, 22 or 25 years old, trying to figure out where you were going to go in this industry. And I'm talking retail, CPG, marketing. I'm talking the kind of the broad universe. Where do you think the big opportunity is?
I think you've got to be technologically literate, if not highly savvy. And like I said, the path, look, I would want to be at a place where I could make the most difference. And the good news, our sector has a lot of opportunity to make a difference. Again, choose the America you want, right? So to get to the better America, to keep the better America in grocery, we need young people to be tech focused and do a lot of the things, frankly, that Amazon is doing, right? And there's so much opportunity to help our regional grocers and multi-regional grocers, traditional supermarkets, evolve, right? So be that agent of change. And I think the path is going to be AI backed. It's going to have a lot of automation. Obviously, it's going to be omni-channel, and people who are experts in those areas, who make the investment at school to become great and passionate about making those changes happen, they're going to make a real difference. That's the opportunity. That's where I would counsel people to spend time.
Yeah, it's funny. It isn't even the worst idea in the world to go work for Amazon for 2 or 3 years. By the way, I always think you'll learn a lot there. And some of the smartest people I know, and one of them being Tom Furphy, who's also done one of these conversations for class, was at Amazon. You learn a lot there. You meet a lot of smart people, and there's a lot of entrepreneurial effort coming out of people who went there, got incredible exposure to a lot of different ideas, a lot of smart people, and they come out and are equally able to change the world.
Agreed. And I have a mentee who used to work on my team, who's been there and has had an extraordinary experience. Look, the bottom line is you want to go to a place where you have an ability to learn a lot, to match your passion with opportunity, and make a difference. Right. And so this sector is rife with those opportunities. And I hope a lot of your young folks and others take them, because we need bright young folks to help continue to transform our space. We need it.
Well, Scott, I really appreciate your time and your generosity as always. If people want to just check out what your company does, students can do that, right? What is your website name?
pjsolomon.com.
So they can just check it out and see what you're all about.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I look forward, the students should know that a number of years ago, you came out and did it live in front of the class. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do that again down the road before too long.
I'm looking forward to that. Good luck, everybody.
Take care.
Take care, Kevin.